Let's take a deeper dive. What are some of the strategies and tips that you can use to address the who and the how to facilitate getting your impact pathway over that valley of death? So this is all about traversing over that gap. What you'll realize as you do this more is what we're talking about here is getting over that valley of death. It's all about change and understanding the process of change. More precisely, it's actually about changing behavior of people. The underpinning pathways are a little bit different. They're more about changing assets, things that are used by people to support that change process. And also building these assets by definition actually also means change. Change to the knowledge base, change to relationships, and so on. Now, this all seems quite easy and obvious, but many of you will appreciate that changing people's behavior can be challenging. Even changing our own habits can be tough, let alone change for out in the public, practice change on farm, policy change. If change was easy, we would have done it already. We need some tools and strategies to help us do this. Now, there are many theories regarding behavior change out there. Here are a few. One is known as the Knowledge Attitude Behavior model, the CAB model. Is also the COM-B model, which underpins some other models around implementation science, which is around competency, opportunity, motivation, leading to behavior. And we've drawn on this particular model quite a lot as we were developing up the Impact Pathways conceptual framework and some of the tools. There is also another model known as the Knowledge to Action framework, which is another good one to go and have a look at. And one more, just for good measure, Gleicher. This is all about some of the variables that you need to include to overcome the resistance to change. Now, this is all very well and good, but if you think about iPEN's approach around keeping it simple, don't let yourself get bogged down or getting stuck in a rabbit hole of theory. These are a few that you might like to go and have a look at, but you absolutely don't need to. Remember, the key thing is there isn't a strict recipe to follow. A more useful thing to remember is that change requires action. Action is asking the question about who needs to take what action. When we're thinking about and planning our impact pathways, this is really what we need to be thinking about. Who needs to take the action and what action do they need to take? And then how can you support this to occur using tactics that work for them? As many of you might appreciate, doing things like providing a lengthy research publication or a written up paper to a farmer to try and get them to change their irrigation practice is not going to be successful. We know from research that farmers are much more likely to change their behaviour if they see it working on a farm and through conversations with trusted sources, other farmers or trusted advisors. The other thing to remember is that impact is a collective endeavour. Impact's a team sport. So have a think about who else do you need on the team to help you get that change and impact pathway progressing as successfully as possible. So here we make the differentiation between actors and stakeholders. This is all about understanding there's a subtle difference between taking action and being interested. Some stakeholders may also be actors to support the impact pathway to occur, but in some cases you will have stakeholders who are interested in what's happening but will have very little to do with supporting the action to occur to support the change process. So what tools can you use to identify what action or actions need to be taken? We actually have many of them already. Through the training wheel that iPEN has developed, the tools and resources that we point you to are these, so things like Beyond Results Impact Planning tool, things like empathy maps, your program logic. These are all great starting points. What the Impact Pathway framework does is it simply provides more details and more specific ways to think about impact so that then you can plan it in better. Remember, the principle we want you to keep applying is to keep it simple. Try not to let yourself get overwhelmed. If you're feeling overwhelmed, stop. That's a good sign that you need to go and take a break, or you need to go and get some fresh eyes or some fresh advice. Get a perspective from someone different. But what we have found is useful is taking that impact pathway framework, the diagram, and just asking some questions for your work. So this is an example that we've developed up and have used in Miro, where for each of the pathways here, we're asking a few simple questions. So the first one is around what change or changes would you need to see? So that's the short-term outcomes. Who would need to be involved in that happening? How would you need to work with them? And how important is this pathway given the critical issue or issues and the needs of stakeholders? So thinking through all of these sorts of questions and just popping some notes down is a really good place. You don't need to fill out a fancy template. Just jotting this down with your team is more than sufficient usually. So we would normally start with this first, and what that will also help to support your thought processes around then those underpinning pathways. Now sometimes you might be able to think about this more quickly. It's going to depend a bit. But this is thinking about what knowledge, both that formal and informal, might you need to build off, and then how are you going to feed back or contribute to that? So what kind of new or changed knowledge, formal and informal, do you hope to create or generate that will help support the longer term outcomes and impacts? And then you can ask the next follow-up questions about what skills and abilities are required to transition your outputs to the short-term outcomes, and then asking the flip side question, what new or strengthened skills and abilities do you hope to create or generate support for those longer-term outcomes and impacts, and for whom? Similar questions for both relationships and for infrastructure. And we've got some basic templates that you can use to help address these in a simple, systematic way, like we've described here. So what this design process looks overall is a 3-step process. So the first step is figuring out what do we want to achieve. This is all about the program logic, developing up that basic program logic. But that big next step is diving into the how, the who and the how. So which impact pathways are we going to need to follow to influence change and to help people do things differently? And so here you'll see that we've unpacked 3 separate things in this how piece, and that this is all going to be supported through a process of continuous improvement. So just to recap in this how diagram, this is all about thinking how to achieve those outcomes. Who do you need to involve? Who are the actors that you need to take action, and the relationships that you need to have to enable that? Then we need to think about how to ensure that we can engage them and making that knowledge accessible so that it can be used, effectively mobilized and used. And then thinking about what do we want those actors to be doing differently? So how can we help them integrate those findings, the research outputs, into their practice or their decision making, or whatever that change state needs to look like? And as we've said earlier, think about the who first before you get into the how. We've got a really useful set of some prompting questions to get you started. For the big picture, for the who, and for the how, you can take this page and use it as a prompting template. But what you must remember most importantly about your process and the tools is to keep it simple. Often a whiteboard and a discussion using a draft program logic is going to be sufficient. Remember, you can't follow a strict recipe, which means completing a template is not going to get you there. You can read all the books you like, but it is a messy and constantly surprising and challenging process. And the pathways to impact from research is not dissimilar. The process isn't straightforward. You most certainly don't want to do it by yourself. And you do need to just keep reviewing and updating your strategies. Got any questions? Go and check out iPEN's website, particularly the iPEN resources section, or feel free to reach out to iPEN. You can reach iPEN on this email address, ipentraining@sciencenewzealand.org, or if you happen to know who your iPEN representative is in your CRI, flick them an email. They'll be more than happy to help you. Thanks for listening. We hope that was helpful. Ka kite!